not been and things still remain the same. And I don't wanna play. See that this is not the way to be, and the time has come to choose. If it comes down to a fight between you and me, then you are doomed to lose.
Keep the red flag flying here.
Hello and welcome to Socialist Night Live. We've got some great guests for you tonight, and one of them has just had an interview with us. A lot of you will have watched that. I hope you really enjoyed it. I certainly did as an interviewer. I'm a little touch embarrassed that I did declare my interviewing technique perfect, because I sound like a right arrogant prat. But the subject of the interview was absolutely outstanding. So we've got Paul. Hi, Paul.
Hey, Paul. Alright. Nice to see you again.
Not so bad at all. So did you enjoy the interview? You know, like, was it? How did you think it went? You won't have seen it yourself, but
No, I won't have seen it myself, but also I don't know if you remember the night we did it. I'd completely misremembered, so I thought it was the next day. So I was just settling in to watch Liverpool lose to Burnley when you messaged me, and I thought, well, that's tomorrow. So hopefully it didn't look like it was just off the cuff and last second. But no, it was a great interview, and I think what he's doing with the Socialist think tank project is brilliant, and sort of exploring that question of what is socialism is really good. And you know, we're doing that with the Political Education project as well. It's the first sort of topic we're covering as part of the 10-week course, and it's important for people to reflect on that and to hear other people's views on it. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
oh, excellent! I'm really glad to hear that. I've just realised I am backwards. So for a second, what I'm going to do is next I'm going to I'll be flipped, so everyone will see me in reverse at the moment, I think. Or will they? Yes, they will.
I don't understand what you're talking about.
Yeah. No, actually, no, you won't. It's not a problem. Don't worry about it. So, so what I'm going to come to next is I'm going to come to Laura Smith, beloved of the left of the Labour Party. Lost your seat last time around. Absolute travesty to have happened. How are you doing, Laura?
I'm all right. Yeah. See, I've had a similar problem that I thought what we were doing tonight, I thought that was last night. So between us, none of us get the right time. But we've all managed to come together this evening, eh? Managed somehow.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm all right. I'm okay.
Excellent.
You.
Yeah, kind of. I am definitely backwards. I've realised
understand what
this.
that means, but as I explained, I've just
so now something weird will have happened, and everyone who's watching will have seen my camera flip around, and all of a sudden I won't be backwards, but I'm now backwards to me. It's a really weird thing. So you know, yeah.
Don't worry about it. Like I said to you before, I've just managed to break a world record, I reckon, by eating a Chinese in about 4 minutes. So there's a good chance that I could actually be sick
And the
on this.
and the
But it'll
I'm
be
second
going
the
to try
Chinese,
really
not.
hard not to be.
I was going to say, and
It'll
the
be the
second one to
Chinese, not
seven
the
kids,
beer.
we've set a few time records for getting through food, because if you didn't get through it, it was off the plate before you knew.
And we've also got James with us from Socialist Think Tank as well.
Oh,
Hi. Just going to give us a hello because we've already
just
introduced
hello.
yourself.
Just
Yeah,
hello. I've
yeah.
introduced myself.
Need
If you
a
don't
man who
know
needs no
me before,
introduction.
I'm he's in social media and IT officer, and I'm also a socialist think tank doing the majority of the background work on IT and again social media strategy, that type of thing, editing videos where possible. It's me.
Brilliant. So the first thing I want to talk about is the point of that interview, and the theme of that interview was about political education. And I know this is something that both of you are really, really passionate about. You've just set up something called the Political Education Project. So I'm going to pass it over to you two. You can decide who goes first and just have a little discussion. Tell us a little bit about the Political Education Project and why people should get involved.
Do you want to go ahead, Laura?
I was going to say, you go ahead, Paul, because you are a smooth operator on this one. You've got it absolutely nailed. And by the time you've finished, I reckon my Chinese will have digested a
They've
little bit
settled.
more.
Perfect. So yeah, so again, if anybody watched the interview, they would have seen we discussed their pub, and hopefully people have seen it on social media. We launched about 3 weeks ago, I guess. And we've started off with a 10-week online course looking at 5 different topics. And the first one tying in with the Socialist Think Tank Origins series is what is socialism. But more broadly, what the project is, and again, this is something because I've known Laura now for about a year and a half, 2 years. First off, through my work with the Left campaign, which was making the socialist case for leaving the European Union. And Laura was one of a tiny, tiny handful of Labour MPs with the conviction and the vision to understand what a socialist position around Brexit should have looked like. But unfortunately, the people who held sway within the Labour Party, within the PLP, managed to scupper that for everyone and set us back a good 10 years and hand the Tories power on a silver platter. So I've known Laura for a while. And again, before we even set up Left, one of the arguments I've been making for a few years is that political education was a massive problem in the sense that it wasn't being done in any way seriously, either by the Labour Party, by Momentum. The trade unions do some work with their members, but again, the orientation is slightly different. And all of the small groups on the left within Britain have a very sort of particular insular dynamic and are still engaged in debates about what the correct response to the Kronstadt should have been and so forth. And so it's a very different dynamic. So I've been having these conversations with Laura and with other people for years. And then after the election in 2019 in Manchester, we decided, right, we would just start. This has to be done. So we started off a small group. Laura was part of that, and a lot of other good trade unionists and community activists. And we started this online format where we'd meet every 2 weeks or so. The group would collectively choose a topic. One person within the group would then pick readings and would lead off the discussion 2 weeks later. And we've just been developing it like that. Now it's informed by a lot of stuff in the background. Politically, it's informed by the idea of working class self-emancipation and about empowering working class people to be able to take part in all the struggles that are central to our lives. And also what's called the Freirean sort of pedagogical approach. So based on the work of Brazilian educator Paulo Freire. And again, it's about people learning through doing themselves. And so we've been, the Beehive, it became known as the Beehive in Manchester, which is a sort of callback to the Chartist movement, and one of the most popular newspapers at the time was called the Beehive. And obviously the link of B is to Manchester. So we've been running that for about a year. It's going well, but again, it was clearly insufficient. And again, I think all of you are involved in Labour, so I can probably say things that you can't. But like the pivot of the Labour membership from someone like Jeremy Corbyn, who was a decent social democrat, to someone like Keir Starmer, who was a restoration centrist candidate, showed that within the Labour Party there wasn't any serious political education. If people were actually duped, it's even worse than than it looks. You know? So we just started doing the political education, but realised it needed to be done on a much grander scale. With the defeats the left has suffered in Britain, in the United States, but also in continental Europe, whether it's Podemos or Syriza or whatever it was, we knew that this is something we have to do. We know that if we don't put in the foundations and sort of empower people to engage in, whether it's party politics, the trade union, the communities, if we don't do that work and support people in that, well, then we just rush headlong into another round of defeats. And so we're hoping to support people. Again, our approach to it is we're not coming to people with the answer. We're coming to people with a set of tools and a set of supports to try and help people do it themselves. We're very much influenced by the sort of maxim that the Black Panthers had, which was sort of each one teach one. We see it with ourselves, actually. So I only met you, Paul, 2 or 3 weeks ago when we did the interview. But since we've launched the political education project, Socialist Think Tank has taken the initiative and stepped in and done audio recordings of the readings that we're asking people to walk through. And we're seeing it. We know that people in the trade union branches are forming groups to do the reading. We know that people in tenants unions and other reading groups and so forth are getting together. So that's exactly what we were hoping to see. It's a first step. We need to do a lot more. We need to build up resources and capacity, but it's a first step in the right direction.
I told you it was good.
Yeah. So
Summed that up well, didn't you?
Yeah. So just to touch on the point of the audio recordings and all the work what you've been doing with that at the moment, it really helps people like me. So I'm dyslexic, and I've struggled with like attention deficit disorder all my life, and it's really hard to concentrate, and especially when it's hours worth of reading. I just kind of focus on that, like maybe a couple of articles. That's perfectly fine. It just when it does come very time consuming, like some people just haven't got the time in the day, for example. So I think the audio format for me works perfectly well. I haven't really got time to read like a solidified book, hours worth of reading. I haven't got time for that. But with it on audio, I can sit and be doing work, or I can sit do exercise. I can be potting around the house doing housework while I've got the audio book on. And it's much easier and convenient for me.
No, I mean, I think you're spot on there. And I guess, sorry, before Laura comes, just to say that we've also had people that have just gotten involved who have started, because me and Paul discussed this briefly, but people have started producing a glossary of terms that are perhaps unfamiliar. So again, I'm sort of somebody who's, when I was younger, I was kicked out of school, but once I got back in, I've been in sort of education now for about 20 odd years, and I sort of work in university, and I've read a lot of this stuff and I'm familiar with it, so the terms are familiar enough to me. And even then we had a discussion and we tried to go for the most accessible stuff we could find, and sort of, stuff that was well written and open in that way. But even with that, absolutely, we're aware that people are coming at it with all different sorts of level of starting points and sort of different challenges and so forth. And so the audio recordings is brilliant. Another person, and now a group of people taking the initiative with this glossary. And here's the thing is that, again, we have big ambitions for the project, and Laura can talk about it. We've got really big ambitions for what the project could do and the contribution it could make to rebuild an independent working class political education in Britain, Ireland, and further afield. But even if it does nothing else after the first 10-week course, the fact that we'll now have a library of audio recordings of really important texts, the fact that we now have this updated contemporary glossary of key terms, that'll be an immense resource for people going forward. Whatever else happens now, we're hoping to do an awful lot more, but we've already started off really strong. Sorry, Laura.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's I agree with you as well. It's about how we can make it as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. One thing that always people can't believe really when I tell them, because I'm really odd in that I was one of the few, well, I am odd anyway, but one of the few truly working class people to ever get into Parliament. You know, the first time I walked into Parliament was as a member of Parliament representing my hometowns. I'd never been there before. I'd only ever been to London a handful of times because, let's face it, it's expensive to go down. So it just wasn't something that was open or possible to me. And when I went in there, I thought to myself, God, I know I'm a good campaigner, and I know that I can speak to a crowd, and I know my politics, and I know I'm pure of heart, but I'm not going to be able to hold my own here with these people because they've all been to posh universities and they've had loads of money spent on their education. And I kind of thought, oh my God, I'm going to be found out as being daft. It took me about 3 weeks to realise that it wasn't me who was daft or away with the fairies. It definitely, we forget how much life experience working class people have, and the fact that they are the people who can bring the true energy and change to a debate. It isn't the people who sit talking the talk and walking the walk, but basically not having a Scooby's what life is actually about and what needs to happen in our communities to change the way that things are for working class people. So I totally get it, and sometimes I read this stuff and it takes me quite a while to digest it, and I have no shame. I'll speak to as many people as I need to be able to understand it and to get my head around it. And I did that in Parliament. Like Paul said, I was one of the only people. At some points, I felt like the only one making the case for exiting the EU, as the socialist case for that. But I didn't go in as an expert in Europe. But what I did do was I made sure that I found out the answers in whatever way that I could. If I didn't understand something, I went back and I asked, and I delved deeper because I had a responsibility to do that. There's a lot of people in there who don't put that kind of effort in, and most of those ones are the ones who have had an awful lot of money spent on their education. So I think if only working class people believed in themselves a bit more, imagine what we could do. And that's what I hope comes out of the political education project. I hope that we're able to empower people, that we're able to motivate them to be able to develop themselves, to start looking at what's happened in the past, the good bits and the bad bits, and how we then move forward in the future. And I definitely think we can do it. But I think what we need to do, and what this is about, is we stop waiting for somebody else to deliver it. It didn't come in the Corbyn project. That political education wasn't developed in the way that it was necessary. We spoke to, yes, they did it, and they spoke to a certain group of people, but we didn't reach the working class people, those people in Labour heartlands. We didn't reach them. So let's do it ourselves. And who's best placed really than working class people living and breathing it every day? Don't wait for the Labour Party to do it.
So, just a couple of things on the chat. You're getting a lot of love, Laura. People think you're brilliant.
Oh, that's nice.
And if anyone does want to, put a question in the chat for the group, then please do, because I can see absolutely everything on every platform, whether that's Facebook, whether that's Twitch, whether that's Twitter, or whether it's YouTube. So I do see absolutely everything. And if I miss you, it's not because I don't like you. It's just because I'm rubbish at my job. So, right. So one of the things I wanted to bring up here at this point was, do you think that a lot of I read the podcasts. So I made the podcast by doing a reading, and then Laura from Socialist Think Tank as well edited together what I'd read. And some of the terms I read out, I didn't know what they were, and I just said them. And sometimes I was on Google to find out the pronunciation of certain words, and
I'm me.
yeah, and do you know that
It's all right.
when you read these things, like, I think sometimes it's really important to say it's okay not to know something.
Exactly.
I think the first thing when a lot of people who are maybe from a different educational background, when they get something, they'll see that as a first barrier. They'll go, right, okay, I don't understand what this is. It might be a name, it might be a theory or something, but basically the whole thing, like, so Hal Draper's, like, James Connolly, really accessible, really good. I think most people would understand that and be able to read it, or if they can't read, if they can't read it well, they can listen to it and understand it. But the Hal Draper stuff had so many technical things in, and so many isms, and there were, like, people's name isms and ites and things. And do you think that kind of puts people off? Because most of what he said was common sense. If you want a political system that works for people, then everyone needs to be involved, is the message of what Hal Draper was putting out.
Is it not just because it was the language of the time? And obviously there is internal language in the Labour Party where there is a lot of ites and isms, and there is a lot of that in politics. But that's just, it's like when you go into any profession, let's say, let's call it that. it just for sake of argument, so I can make an example, is when you go into alchemical chemical type of stuff, or the scientific world, there's a lot of patterns in the words, so you can categorize them essentially, and I think there's that's essentially what happens in politics, but obviously on a fundamental level of language and expression. I'm not as comfortable with that type of thing. I think that's more obviously the political education projects type of side, and that's where I think that'll come from, is the education that you're doing now. So people like myself in the working class can kind of come into it slowly and methodically, and get introduced to these little words, because you're going to have to learn them really if you want to get more involved in the politics.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that, and that's what I was kind of going to say. If I look at my journey when I kind of first started getting involved in politics to where I am now, the amount that I have learned along the way is massive. I didn't have that knowledge at the start of it, and that's the same with anybody when they go on an educational journey. So I think it's totally fine to not know all of the terms, and necessarily kind of, you can I read some stuff and then I come out of it none the wiser until maybe we go into the discussion, and then I can kind of pick it apart. But I think my advice would be, it's fine if you find yourself Googling it, you have an interest in learning and knowing. You're not expected to know this stuff at the start. I certainly haven't. And the first time I went on, because I'd known Paul for a while, like I said, but the first time I went on the meeting, I kind of was dead honest and said, oh my gosh, I don't really understand what you're talking about. And I thought I was fairly politically educated, but you quickly catch on. You do. I think we're all a bit harsh on ourselves, aren't we? And it's you do get there with it.
Well, if you're here at this point, watching at this point, I think you've got enough enthusiasm to dig into a bit of reading material on the subject.
But in an accessible way, I think that's important. Just before I bring you in, Paul, it says we've got Leanne Powell saying, "I'm a working class black country girl with poor education. Self-doubt and social anxiety is a huge barrier for me. I never felt I would fit in at meetings, and I was scared to speak. But Socialist think tank's given me a lot more confidence. I'm now submitting motions at most meetings." I'd only read the first couple of sentences. I didn't do that to blow Socialist think tank's trumpet. But what it is it's important for people to be able to feel that confidence, and that would, I think, for me, being able to admit that you don't understand something is huge. Put the emphasis back on the person who's explaining it to you. If you don't understand something, you might not have explained it very well. You know, the person who's explained it might not have explained that very well. And I learned this going back as a postgrad. I felt so, when I went back and did postgraduate studies, I felt so out of my comfort zone. And that made me, I'm a teacher, it made me a better teacher, because I was thinking, when I was sitting there thinking, I don't know what this means. I don't know what these words mean. It made me a lot more confident, and made me ask a lot more. Do you know what that word means? Because that might be the only thing that's stopping you from understanding an entire concept. Yeah. So, Paul, I'll bring you in there. So.
No, I think the three have made really important points, and Laura, who wrote in the comment there, was really, and I think Laura, who wrote in the comment, just illustrates an important point about what the political education project is as well, is that none of us are static. None of us are just fixed in a place, you know what I mean? That we're all constantly developing and changing and growing in different ways. And education is part of that. So when I was young, when I was in primary school, I was in sort of remedial class because I couldn't read that well and couldn't, numerically wasn't that good. When I went to secondary school, I was in the second lowest of the four classes we had. Because it didn't, I had behavioural issues and everything else. I got kicked out of school, and then I went back in, and I had a passion for history, and that sort of changed how I approached education. But then over time, it was a process. Now the thing is so we don't just give people the readings; we post a video as well. And the video is important because, again, that's precisely us saying to people in lots of different ways, here's the structure, here's what we think is important, but you decide what you think is important. But also don't worry about it. If you don't get it all first time, don't worry about it. If you can't get all the reading done first time, don't worry about it. I do think that the reading or listening, depending on people's own needs, is important, because we had this discussion in the political education project. And again, it's about that empowering people. So again, part of the problem, as Laura mentioned, in if we take one aspect of politics, which is sort of Westminster and electoralism, the political sort of class, such as it is made up of people of a particular class background. So upper class, middle class, who've all been educated broadly in the same way, who all have more than enough confidence to make up for their actual ability, and who all swan around talking with all this jargon and all this language. And the thing is we have to empower working class people so that you can just pin them down and go, well, that's nonsense. This idea you're talking about
Yeah.
how the state works and how the legislation works and how law reform might work or how the economy works, that's all nonsense. None of that's true, and I'll tell you why, and I'll explain it to you, and you won't bamboozle me, and you won't sort of sidetrack me by trying to invoke some new terms because I'm up to speed on this. So that is important. And again, Connolly, I think, is really important. So for me, and again, I've spent years doing this, and I have many gripes with the political left, the existing left, as it were, in Britain and elsewhere, because again, there's been a series of processes over the last 40 years where the particular class composition of a lot of left groups is sort of the class A, middle class people who are in there trying to show off to each other about which version of Marx they've read in the original French and whatever else, and who knows this and who knows that. And the whole point is to break that down. And this is why Connolly's so important. Connolly left school at 11 or 12, lied about his age to join the British Army, and then became a Marxist, a trade unionist and socialist, and understood the ideas of Marx more acutely and more clearly than very many people that have dozens of PhDs in this stuff. So it's important for us to empower our people, and by our people I mean the working class in its full sort of richness and complexity. So the reading part is important, but it's also something that, again, we launched a project with a set of ideas and talking about how you relate it and how someone explains it. Again, if you can't explain something clearly, it's because you don't understand it yourself. And usually a lot of people are bullshitting around this. They're blagging it. They're going, oh, well, proletarian revolution is, but they haven't got a clue. You know what I mean? They're just sort of, they've read a couple of books. They've got half an idea, but they're not fully sure. And we've said, and we've been having discussions, because before we launched this, we had the Beehive in Manchester, but we were also discussing this project for about 6 or 7 months before we launched it. And some of the people involved in it, so our comrades in Trademark in Belfast, have been doing political education with trade unions and community groups for years. And the point we made was the people that we have doing this, which includes Laura and me, Sasha, Joe, and a few others, have to be the sort of people that can go into the local pub with their friends, sit down and have a pint, and within about 10 minutes have people convinced of the need to abolish private property without having to get into any jargon or anything like that, but to be able to have that conversation. You know, if you can have read every volume of Capital, and you can have read all of Marx's letters and everything else, but unless you can actually convey that to people in a way that's tangible to their life, it means nothing. So we're aware of that. We'll keep under review how we deliver the course. We'll keep under review the reading we do. So in the next session, which is going to be on capitalist crisis, we're going to take a slightly different approach. Rather than giving people existing readings, Joe and Sean, who are leading that session, are going to draft something themselves. So we'll see if people find that more accessible. We might look at that as a different model as we go forward. But again, we've had these discussions, and we sort of agreed initially that it's important to get people to read this, again, because it's important people to understand the history and traditions of working class movements as well. So again, understanding who James Connolly was, understanding the Chartists, understanding the tradition in Britain and Wales, the miners' libraries across Lancashire, of the workers' institutes and everything else, understanding that and understanding how this has always been a central part for working class people, and reclaiming that is a part of what we're trying to do as well.
We're in County Durham, mate. Me and James are both in County Durham, and Socialist Think Tank is born out of County Durham. We've got James Connolly in the background there. I've got a picture of him just there, and he is on miners' banners. He's on miners' banners, and you know we've got Lenin's on miners' banners.
Just to say, sorry, Paul, when Connolly was executed, British Labour Party MPs in Parliament cheered. The miners didn't. The miners wouldn't have cheered, but the Labour Party MPs at the time cheered when Connolly was executed. But the working class in Durham, in Birmingham, and elsewhere, they knew Connolly. They recognised Connolly. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's a massive point to make that, and sometimes the more establishment kind of side of the Labour Party And I'm learning more and more about this every day, you know, I'm currently, I do listen to audiobooks myself, which is one of the inspirations for thinking, actually, wouldn't an audiobook be an easy way for people to access this? And I'm listening to Clem Attlee's at the minute, and it's just like soul destroying in a way when you think about this movement that was like powered by working class people, and then these liberal people kind of like absorb themselves, these establishment figures. And Clem Attlee, good prime minister, you know, did good things, but like he was a self-declared socialist, and I would say he's way to the left of where Keir Starmer is, for example. But that's not saying much. But you know, he wasn't really for a massive change in the system. He didn't want to change the system. He was quite happy with the establishment. He enjoyed the public school he went to. He enjoyed going to Oxford. He enjoyed all these different things that were to do with the British establishment. He thought that was what was important. And, you know, when we lose that kind of feel for what working class people want within a movement, I think that's a really sad thing about the Labour Party. And I'm not 100% sure that the Labour Party has ever been, for a very, very long time, for the working class. You know, it's supposed to be, but is it? You know,
I mean, I have to be fairly careful on this one. I've always seen the Labour Party as it can be a piece of the puzzle because of the system that we're in. And it can be an important piece of the puzzle. See, I can't even speak. The puzzle. But yeah, I think the most important thing is building grassroots power, building power within the working classes, campaigning, organising, educating around the things that will change people's lives, and then politicians hopefully will listen. But I can tell you right now, if we're to leave it to the people who are elected Labour Party politicians to make the changes that communities like mine need, it's not going to happen. I mean, it hasn't happened, has it? So we just need to look at history. As I say, I remain hopeful that it can be a part of it in some way. And there are some great people who are working within the Labour Party. And there's some decent politicians. I'll give a shout out to Ian Byrne, who's leading on the Right to Food campaign and achieving something with that, and you know, is hopefully going to end up influencing national strategy and make it a lot easier for people to campaign around the changes that need to happen with universal credit, etc. My comrades in No Holding Back, Ian Lavery and John Trickett, you know, there are decent people in there, but yeah, the power comes from the class and our communities, and that's where we need to concentrate, in my opinion. And to be honest, Paul's taught me an awful lot about this. It's probably best just not to waste that much energy and time kind of concerning ourselves with it in the internal battles within the Labour Party, and just see it for what it is, the positives and the negatives. I choose to remain in it. I can see a benefit for that still, but I respect people who have had enough of it at the same time.
I think because we have discussed this, as Laura said, and not just sort of two of us have discussed it, but also within the beehive, because a lot of the people involved in the Manchester political education were people who had been very active in Labour during the Corbyn period, and we put a lot of time and energy into it, and then left after the election. And some still hung in there as well. My own view of it, so there's a guy called Theodore Rothstein who wrote a fantastic book, which everybody should read if they can, which is called From Chartism to Labourism. And so really, the Labour Party, the British Labour Party, is born of the defeat of the British working class. The Chartist movement was the real movement of the radical British working class. And if you look back and read through what the chart, Bronte O'Brien and people like this, and what they wrote, and their understanding of the state, and their understanding of the nature of capitalism and the things that have to change. And Marx and Engels learned from the Chartists, which is really important. They learned and gained an understanding of politics from them. And Labour then, as you said, Paul, emerged in the sort of late 19th, early 20th century. It was that funny concoction of sort of some Marxists and socialists, and Emily Pankhurst, people like that. Sylvia Pankhurst, sorry. and other sort of Marxists, as well as then, and you mentioned Hal Draper's piece having isms in it. And one of the reasons I picked that piece for this 4 sessions, I think it's important for people in Britain to understand that, because the Labour Party is primarily defined by Fabianism, always has been, even in the Corbyn era. And again, I think Corbyn and what they were trying to do was really positive. But it was still this idea that a couple of experts and well-intentioned middle-class people would go up to South Shields, wherever else, and tell people what they needed that was good for their lives. But then the one thing that they had a choice in the last 15 years, namely the Brexit referendum, we weren't going to go along with that because the Oaks didn't quite understand it. So we weren't going to go along with that, but we give you everything else. Free broadband, we'll nationalise this, we'll nationalise that. And it wasn't going to fly. I canvassed for Laura in the elections, and it was sort of very frustrating and sort of soul destroying to know that someone like Laura was almost certainly going to lose her seat, not because of anything she'd done, because she was a fantastic MP, but because of the decisions that had been taken at a national level. I think Laura's right. I think the only thing I'd say to anybody involved in Labour is study the history of the Labour Party. And I don't mean biographies of Attlee or Tony Benn. I mean, that's all fine. But actually study the history of it. And you'll see that the Labour Party has always been a party of British capital. Now, it's also always been the only electoral vehicle for the working class in Britain. So it is true in that sense. You know what I mean? Rather than being a party of the working class, it's really been the only option the working class has had electorally. And because of that, important links have developed over time between the unions and the Labour Party. And at different points in time, that has pushed Labour policy to some degree in a more sort of progressive way. But for the most part, the Labour Party has always been a capable servant of British capital, an imperialist party, and a party that stifled working class independent development. So Laura's point again is crucial, and we discussed this in the interview, I think, Paul, is that my own view of socialism and politics, and I think one that a lot of people share and understand as well, is that we just have to build what we need. And then in the future, people might still engage with the Labour Party, but they'll engage with it with their eyes fully open. They'll engage with it from a position of us having a stronger base of working class activists who have a better sense of politics, a better sense of the nature of the state, a better sense of trust and confidence in each other, and they might be able to affect something in it. I don't think so. I'm not in Labour. I don't think that's an avenue for real progress. I think I put my own time and energy into sort of trade union activity and projects like the education project. But as Laura says, it's part of a piece. Although it's interesting, because we mentioned Connolly already, but it was common sense to Marxists and socialists of Connolly's generation that electoral politics wasn't the be all and the end all. It was actually just incidental. So Connolly had this expression that the fight for control of the political state isn't the real battle, it's just the echo of the battle. That the real battle is going on in workplaces, in communities where we build our power, and then we're able to seriously challenge capitalism. Because even if we got Corbyn in, Corbyn might have been able to realise 10% of what the manifesto said, but capital, British and international capital, and the British ruling class would have sabotaged it at every step of the way, and we wouldn't have had the social base strong enough to support it. The Corbyn probably would have been toppled within a year or two, and someone else would have come in, whether it was Starmer.
And also, Paul, just not the political education to be able to deal with it in any way, shape, or form. There was such a lack of understanding of how the media worked and would work. Such a lack of understanding around the European Union and what that would mean for delivering proper socialism in this country. But that's where it comes down to. People's definitions of socialism are very different, aren't they? And what people actually wanted to see happen.
It's one of the best questions to ask at the start of an interview. It's why, one of Paul's, I've noticed, has been a reoccurring theme throughout the episodes. And the variation is absolutely extreme from one, not extreme, so it was something really conservative type of socialism, you would say, to something fundamentally utopian type of socialism. And like you said, it was in the Draper stuff for the two different worlds. Anyway.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, it's such an important discussion to have, though, as well, because again, people talk about Labour being a broad church, right, which is a very healthy euphemism for me, and the right more or less doing whatever they want, and the left trying to hold the whole thing together. That's effectively the history of Labour. You know what I mean? The only people who believe in unity in the Labour Party are the left. The right don't care less. They'll burn the whole thing down happily, because they understand their class interest and their class politics, and they'd quite happily shift over to the Lib Dems or whatever else in due course. But yeah, it's important for us to have that conversation, because whatever other political projects emerge in the future, we're going to have and we're going to need a massive movement around unemployed workers. We're going to have bigger movements around tenants' rights. We're going to certainly have to build another anti-austerity movement. We're going to have to build all of these things, and quite likely stronger anti-war movement going forward. But it's important that we're having these conversations. It's all well and good saying, okay, we'll jump on the same protest together, but we have to clarify what we mean politically, because then we have to know what we're trying to achieve, and then we can make decisions about who would you vote for in this context, and who would you support, and what platform should they pursue. We have to clarify these ideas and have a shared understanding of it.
We've had a real jump in viewers, so either the bots from the Labour Party are out to get us, or we're engaging people.
They'll
here,
all be watching,
really
saying, "Is there anything we can suspend her on?"
Desperate. Can we get Smith? Can we get her?
Yeah, and then they can put a big cross through my face.
Just a reminder to all our viewers, just please put it in the chat. If you're watching this on Red Labour, it needs to go in the Socialist Think Tank chat for us to see this, to see your comments. So sorry if you're commenting on the Red Labour chat and we don't see it. But we've Anthony Riley. Education's important. He's found in general observation and in chatting to people is, it's that kind of Labour or Conservatives dynamic, as if it's a race, as if it's like the kind of almost I think he's describing like the footballisation of, where you've got a team and you support it, which actually it's been really, really damaging up here, where people have decided to switch to the Conservatives and that's their team and they will cheerlead anything at all.
But also on that point, Paul, if you don't mind me coming in, it's like it stops people wanting to look at the politics behind everything. I've always said everything is politics and politics is everything. And you have to be part of that discussion if you want to change anything. And all too often people will throw, stop being party political, you bring in party politics into it. Well, actually, a lot of the time, none of the parties are really delivering what I think needs to happen currently, which is, if we're going to change the way that the system works, it has to be looking at the way that we change the economy to work for the many in this country and not for the few. It isn't that I'm there, even though I am a Labour Party member, I'm a Labour Party councillor. It's the fact that people need to look at the politics behind every single decision, and then they can hold their politicians to account if they understand that. But almost like you say, this, which football team are you supporting? It does exactly what they want it to do, which is it makes people disengage from it and stop challenging it and getting involved in it. And then things just stay the same, which suits them, basically. Sorry, I just totally jumped in then.
No, that was exactly what I wanted you to do. You did exactly what we need to hear. So one of the things that that I was thinking of whilst other people were talking there is, we get ourselves involved in these ridiculous battles within the Labour Party, and we spend a lot of energy on really pointless stuff. So a bit of an exclusive here. I've resigned tonight from the local campaign forum, because the person who asked me to be on the local campaign forum as the treasurer has decided that actually, as a power play, they've decided that I should no longer be in that position. To try and, 3 months before an election, I shouldn't be the treasurer for the local campaign forum because of some sort of weird technicality that they got wrong. And you just think, I can't waste my energy on this kind of stuff. There are so many bigger things to do, and that clearly
like gossip about it on this channel.
Yeah, there are so many more important things for us to do, to be dragged into. And it reminds me of, is it Handforth Parish Council?
Yeah, that's right.
And Laura, you've got some insight into that, don't you?
Oh, I really don't have very much, apart from the fact that I am also a councillor at Cheshire East, but I'm the south of the county, whereas that's the north of the county. What I can say is that I've been in plenty of meetings that are fairly similar to the way that one ran, which I don't think is something that we should be proud of. But this, again, it's really easy, isn't it, for us to all say we want other people to get involved in being councillors. We want to see working class people in there. We want to see people from different backgrounds and ethnicities and all of the rest of it, but watching that, who's going to want to get involved in it? So we've got a bigger challenge, which again is about, we have to get people to understand the way that these things work, so potentially we can change them, make them so that the discussions that are happening in these things are actually relevant to the vast majority of people's lives. But it's I always think, yeah, of course we want more working class people in these roles, but my God, we've got to sort out the whole way that it's ran to make it something that people want to get involved in. Let's not forget that these are like mainly voluntary positions. You know, people are very time poor these days. Of course, it is the people who we most want to see involved in councils. It's very hard for them to get involved because many are working in low pay, long hours, shift work, to then throw in the mix becoming a counsellor. It's just not something that is accessible to a lot of people. So it's something we should be campaigning on loudly, the fact that we want to reform the way that local government and etc. works. But yeah, I mean, it was really funny, wasn't it? To be fair, it gave us all a laugh. It's just a little bit tragic that that is probably the way that so many of these parish councils do run, and the ingrained issues within them, in the way that people speak to each other, the lack of respect, you know, the whole way that it's conducted is shameful, actually. These are people who do have power, by the way, to be able to change the way that people in our community live, however big or small. And you know, if only everybody, like, there was a little bit more thought and effort put into it. But I have to say, one of the people who was on that call is actually Cheshire East Mayor, you know. It's, which is to me, it's ludicrous we even have these mayors. But yeah, you've got to ask yourself kind of the people that we're putting in positions of power, haven't we?
I think one thing with the sorry, were you saying
I was just going to actually quote you from one of the videos that released that didn't go out, obviously, with the main video prior to this live stream, is where you said to be able to plant a tree. The best time to plant a tree was like a year ago, or in the second best time is now. I think that is a big thing, especially after the Jeremy Corbyn movement, and you know how that has transpired, and how politics is now within the Labour Party. Is we need to plant the seeds now for the politicians of the future, because I think that we inspired so many people. Not I say we. I wasn't involved all the way, like just partly. But the movement in general within the Labour Party, it sparked so many people in my generation and others to be able to get involved. And I think we need to be inviting them into into roles like parish councillor, county councillor, etc., and really deliver the next generation, because people in, I think, especially in the northeastern heartland areas, are sick of the around. I found around here, as soon as there's new blood, everybody is behind Labour again. They're like, yes, new blood, like this is what we want. These are the people who are involved in our community. We've seen them around, you know. They've been handing out parcels, donations, etc. throughout the crisis, and so they've seen them active and stuff beforehand in the community centres and all this type of stuff, and in the food banks. And then finally now they've become county councillors or parish councillors. All of a sudden everybody's like, yes, get in. And then I personally see in those elections for those type of people, we'll see a huge surge in voter turnout and voter expectations in comparison to other councillors who've been there a while. And I don't mean to sound derogatory or an attack against the other councillors. I just think it's a mood change thing. And if they see new blood coming into play, and they've seen them around of them growing up and stuff like that. I think it's a big mood change in our area anyway, in Merton.
I think
I'm just gonna I'm just gonna come in with a few comments. We've got lots of comments on are you the clerk, and read the standing orders and understand them, and things like that. We did have one person on Twitch saying seeing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Che next to each other is up here is next level embarrassing. He said, "Well, they were gifts. Don't be an arsehole about people's pictures. Yeah, we'll take it, but I hope you're enjoying it anyway." Someone's asked, "I'm a conservative. Is it okay?" I think no is the answer to that one. And we've had a salam from Bangladesh. So very, very nice little chats coming on. So I think you're about to come in there, Paul.
I was just going to say that, like, I agree with James that I think definitely so the thing is, I used to, even though I'm not in Labour, and I used to speak at.
In fact, can I just say the amount of Labour talk that's going on? I know that Paul's going to be like twitching internally.
Yeah. This is the
internet.
Paul
O'Connell.
Yeah. So I'm going to.
We need to get outside of the Labour Party, but
yeah, a little bit. So I did used to in 2017, 18, 18 19, I spoke at a bunch of Labour CLPs and Momentum branches in London who were debating Brexit and stuff like that. And I was usually going in making the socialist case for leaving. But Corbyn would invariably come up, and I'd make the point to people time and time again in the nicest possible way that I don't care about Jeremy Corbyn. That's not important. What's important is what James has touched on, is the moment that Corbyn represented. So the thing with Corbyn is Corbyn can't be disentangled from Brexit and a period of crisis where people have, right across British society, but particularly of a certain generation, younger people, were looking for an alternative, and they saw that in the politics around Corbyn. So definitely, I think you're right, James, that has politicised people. I'd say, and I hope one thing that the Political Education Project does is that it expands people's understanding of the political, so that it's not just about local councils. That is part of it. It's not just about Westminster. It's certainly not just about elections. If anything, they're probably secondary or incidental. Laura mentioned earlier about everything being political. I mean, that's the reality of it. Laura will lead a session for PEP in a couple of weeks' time on women's oppression. And that's where we look at, from a socialist perspective and from a working class perspective, how housework and everything else is political. How instead of we having the gender divisions of labour that we have, that we should instead be working towards a society where those burdens are lifted off all of us. We've got the technology, we've got the capacity, all these things. So there are all those conversations. There was a great woman called Martha Harnacker, who was a Chilean socialist, and she said that for socialists, politics is the art of making the impossible possible. And so I think that a big part of our job, and certainly with PEP and other things, the things I try to be involved with, is trying to expand people's understanding of what is possible through politics and what politics is, and that's crucially important. So when Laura mentioned there about the type of people we want to get involved in elected office, right? Well, if we're serious about working class self-emancipation, and if we're serious about having people participating, and part of that is participating in local councils and so forth, then there's a campaign out there for people to get paid leave from work in order to take up those posts. Then you wouldn't just get the sort of hobbyists and the sort of older people who've been doing it for donkey's years and become these sort of malicious cartoon characters that shout at each other about standing orders and so forth. You'd get a greater range of people. It's interesting, the Paris Commune, which Marx writes about a lot, was the first real experience in working class democracy and working class government. And the thing with the Paris Commune was every single person there could take up a role within the government of the commune, and anybody who did was only paid the average working, the wage of the average skilled worker. But also anybody who was elected to any post could be subject to recall, right? So we have to completely rethink what representation means, what democracy means. But that's a big project. You can't turn around and say to people now, they look at you as if you're mad. You go, well, hang on, that's not politics. Politics is, people who graduated from Oxford with nice suits telling us how they'll do austerity a bit slower than the other one. I mean, that's what people think politics is. And we have to say, no, it's so much more than that. It's every aspect of your life, particularly in the workplace. It's the fact that you're getting exploited in work. It's the fact that you're constantly in conflict with your employer, and that we have to win that conflict as a class, and we can only do it as a class. So I agree that people have been politicised by the Corbyn period. Unfortunately, my sense of it, and this is just anecdotal because there's no sort of empirical research in this, a lot of the younger people, and I'm talking sort of 18, 19, 20, early stage university people, seem to have reconciled themselves to sort of Starmer type sort of politics. You know what I mean? It's elections, it's getting a career, and that again has always been part of the Labour process. We've done 2 sessions in the Beehive in Manchester on Labourism, and Labourism is a particular form of politics. There's a whole set of ideas and a whole history that goes into that. And Paul had mentioned it earlier, and Laura as well. So the stay and fight thing in the Labour Party, again, I know why people will do it, and people have strong personal and emotional attachments, and they've got friendships and everything else. But where's the fight part of it? I mean, where's that side of it? Where's the stay and fight? Where's the fight part of it? And also then people would say, okay, I'm going to stay in Labour, but Labour's not that important. We know that trade unions and political education, community organising is important, so we're going to do that instead. But you don't. No, I don't mean you. I'm not
I
pointing
do. I do.
I know you do. I know you do. But as a general rule, you don't. And again, the reason you don't isn't a personal failing. It's because of the gravitational pull of Labourism as a form of politics. You end up constantly fighting the next election, the next internal election, the next. You're going to stand for this, you're going to stand for that. Before you know it, it's 8 o'clock in the evening, you haven't even had dinner. You're not going to sit down and start organising with your local tenants union or doing sort of work with your trade union. So yeah, stay and fight. Fight.
It's a lot of time consumption. For me, I've said this to many people. If I didn't have now the financial capacity to be able to spend this much time as I do in politics, I never would have been able to. There is like no way I would have been able to spend. Say socialist think tank. To be fair, sometimes it feels like I do 2 jobs at once. Like one's going on over here while one's going on over here, and I'll be switching between them. It's kind of like a part-time job. So yeah, I'm just thinking the time consumption is a big part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, the way that I look at it, right, is that since I was very, very small, I have had a burning desire inside of myself to fight against social injustice. Nothing can put it out, nothing. That is just the way that I've been made up. It's the family environment that I've grown up in. I will fight until my dying day for positive change. That is just something that is built inside of me. And I don't want that to disappear, because if that disappears and goes away, then what's the future for my kids? What's the future for their kids? It's shit currently, and we need to make it better. So I want to be part of helping to make that better. I think Paul is absolutely 100% correct with the amount of energy that people let be sucked away into things that at the end, you know, what do you have to show for it? The only reason that I was able to become an MP in the first place is because of the nature of the way that election was called. It was a short campaign. If I'd have had to have taken time off work, there's no way that I would have been able to do it. No way. So I got in by accident, pretty much, as a local activist and campaigner. Exactly what you were saying earlier, James, really, that I was able to, you know, it was at the time where the schools were under, well, one of the many times schools have been in a crisis point.
Yeah.
There was a lot of kind of noise around that in our area at the time. I was leading on that, so people got behind it. But at the same time, I didn't even manage a full term in Parliament before the parliamentary machine chucked me out. Because it doesn't want people like me in it. That is the fact of how it currently works. And what we need to do is, and what I will put my energy into in whatever way I possibly can, is trying to get people to understand that their voice matters, that their opinion matters, that they can shape what is needed in the future. That if we work as a collective within our workplaces, if we work as a collective in our communities, then we can deliver positive change. And then hopefully people will start to feel a little bit more like they make a difference, because currently the biggest problem that we've got in places like Crewe is people just don't give a shit, because their life is hard, quite frankly, and to let all of this garbage in is just too much. So it's easier to just shut it out. So what we need to do is try and give them a purpose to be able to join in that fight. And to be able to work together and see change happen. And there's excuse after excuse that is given. We hear it time and time again from councillors as to why things can't change. But it isn't true. Yes, you can't change everything because we have a Conservative government, but there are things that can change. But you have to have the will and to be able to have the vision and the energy to be able to actually try and deliver it. And too many people, they haven't got that. That's not why they're in it. So we need to build that power from the grassroots. I am going to have to go shortly, guys. It's getting late. It's getting late for me.
Just to say as well.
Looks like Paul wants to come in there, but we've also got a question in: is what is the power of cryptocurrency in the perspective of modern? Sorry, in the prospect. I think they mean the perspective of a modern socialist.
Yeah.
You can take that one, Paul.
Yeah, Paul can do that one.
We'll come back onto that in a second, but James might know quite a bit
Oh,
about
I'm all over that
I'll come
one.
back to that in a second. But just to say, even talking about the Labour Party one last time, but just to say, even all the reasons I have for not thinking the Labour Party is a strong vehicle for developing working class politics or socialism, I will say I did campaign for Laura, because even before I knew Laura, she's that rarest of things, which is a genuine principled working class activist, and they're as rare as sort of hen's teeth in the Labour Party. And it was a real loss for our class when Laura lost her seat, and it was a loss for the people of Crewe. Massively so. On cryptocurrency, I mean, it's a good question. I think it's impossible to do justice to it in a sort of brief comment. What I will say is that the way or one of the ways, or one of the main things around capitalism and the capitalist system, is that capitalism as a system constantly enters into crisis one way or another. And the main motor force driving capitalism is the exploitation of labor and the pursuit of profits, and the pursuit of profits as quickly as possible and new avenues of profits. And in the last 30 years, this has led to what's known as the financialization of capitalism. Again, I don't want to sort of, because this is a short Saturday night thing and people have had a beer, so nobody wants to hear all this. But Kostas
Not at all. I'm loving it.
Kostas Lapavitsas has done really good work on this, and lots of other people have. The thing with cryptocurrencies, and that they're an interesting technological innovation. They will fuel bubbles within the capitalist system short term, but they won't fundamentally change social relations within capitalism. Now, in a post-capitalist society, what form of currency and so what we have, we won't know. There's an expression that Lenin had, which was that trying to explain what a communist society would look like to somebody living today would be like trying to teach higher order mathematics to a chimpanzee. And this goes back to the question we had earlier about reading and education and so forth. The whole point is that we change through our activities. Through the things we do in life, we learn different things, we transform. Ideas that we take for granted suddenly become sort of obsolete and old-fashioned and so forth. So if we go through a prolonged period of social transformation and change the relationships, if we get to a world where people don't have to get up every day and go out and sell themselves in order to survive, if we get to a world like that, then everything will change. Our understandings of what sort of intimate relationships should look like, of how childcare takes place, of what a state is, of what money is, all this would change. And cryptocurrency would be a weird sort of early 24th century hype that makes no sense anymore. I'm sorry, that's the best answer I can give, because it's
I can elaborate a little bit on the cryptocurrency. So fundamentally, all it is right. It's like you say, is if you go down to the basics of it, right? When you want on about currency is based off the trade and exertion of one's labor, right? And I think that's exactly the same as what happens in cryptocurrency, but instead the exchange, instead of the individual, it ends up being some electric or some type of energy in that format. So it's generated by burning bloody fossil fuels, or it's generated through nuclear power plants, whatever. It's burned through energy. And the same expenditure is exactly the same expenditure. What happens is when you exert energy is when you're putting it into labor. Mm-hmm. And that's the way I think you need to think about cryptocurrency in that aspect. Is fundamentally the same exchange is happening. It's energy into a market. That's it. It's energy input into a market. Mm-hmm. And I think, like you say, it will short-term cause bubbles and huge economic growth in particular areas, but in particular markets, but it'll also crash others. It's so volatile. I don't think it's the future. There's too much exertion to be able to verify the contracts. to be able to, because there's a lot of computational power to be able to go through the chain of contracts to be able to verify each other for all the Bitcoins and Ether or whatever type of cryptocurrency you're talking about. So I don't really want to go into it much further. Like I say, it is a Saturday at like 10 at night. I don't want to be talking about cryptocurrencies, to be honest with you.
And the one last thing I would say about it is that, like any technological advance, if we had a society which was governed on the basis of democratic decision making about what people need, well, then the technology around cryptocurrency could be valuable, because it could allow you to make much quicker decisions about allocation and what's needed where within the economy and so forth. So it could be useful. Within capitalism, it becomes the basis for speculative bubbles. So some people watching might be old enough to remember when sort of the internet first came on the scene and we had the dot-com boom. So just the mere existence of websites and trading websites and sort of online companies was insane. And again, it was another speculative bubble, and the backside fell out of it. And that's the thing with capitalism. It's one of those things that, and I think Joe and Sean will cover this in the second political education session, which is that the crisis we're in now, which is immediately related to COVID-19, was on the cards before COVID-19 popped up. Because capitalism as a system will keep producing crises, and those crises will keep getting worse, and working class people will keep suffering on the other end of it unless we fundamentally transform our whole set of social relationships.
Yeah.
At this point, and I know Laura, you're getting tired, aren't you? You've been absolutely outstanding.
That's the post-MSG crash. That's what that is. That's the come down.
I know. It's the Chinese.
Right? Yeah.
It is. It's the post-MSG crash. And we've been quite open about this. We've all been having a little drink tonight, haven't we? So have you all enjoyed the drink that you've been having? You know.
Yeah. No, definitely. It's a Saturday, isn't it?
I've been having a Steam Machine brew, and we're not sponsored by them or anything. Anyway, I just love them.
Anti-establishment
IPA. But
I'm really I'm letting the side down with a glass of Pinot Grigio then.
no, that's great. But
written across my head.
Nothing too good for the working class, Sylvia. That's it.
Yeah, I mean let's not. I'm not. It was about £5.25 for. So
that's good. No, that's we've got a 1 year.
The mid price.
Yeah,
one of the first times I ever drank wine years ago was with a bunch of Basque people, and I drank a thing called Calimucho, which is where you get the cheapest red wine you can get and mix it with Coke. And I drank 4 liters of it. It was amazing.
Oh, that's grim. That's grim. But interestingly, sorry, on that point, my Chinese came with a free bottle of Coke.
Oh, nice.
So maybe that's what I can indulge in shortly.
just bang it into your wine and you'll be fine. We've had some really interesting comments here with the person who asked us about the cryptocurrency, shared it and seems to really appreciate the fact that we've done that. We've addressed this. We've had some people. We're getting some trolls, so that's always.
Plenty of them.
There's always it's always a good thing. And if you want to have a name that's an alias, don't call yourself AI Smith, Artificial Intelligence Smith. Come on. So they
follow me round, Paul, like flies to shit. Honestly, they're just always there. I almost treasure them a little bit.
Yeah,
I'd be sad if they left.
There's a little bit, and I think we can probably deal with this. And what we might do in a second is, if Paul, are you okay to stay for a little bit longer?
Yeah, I can hang on for a little bit. Yeah,
we can sub you out and sub someone else in if you want, Laura. If that's okay, if you're tired and want to go and do life.
It's like WWF wrestling. This is like tag
teaming. Tag teaming.
Loving it. It's the Royal Rumble. Come on.
So what we've got is you want things handed to you. If we had socialism, there would be no iPhone or computer. This is pathetic. Boo.
Nice.
This kind of thing. And there's a few of those kind of comments that we want everything for nothing in socialism. And I think that can be dispelled immediately, because it's the people who work so hard that produce things for people who are particularly rich.
Isn't it really weird how when it comes to saying that you and me and ordinary people can have more and deserve more and should have more, that then you get loads of people saying, but how are you going to pay for it, etc., etc. They need to understand that at the top of this, there are a load of people absolutely creaming it in off the exploitation of ordinary people, and we let them get away with it. And I cannot get my head around why so many people are okay with that happening. I don't think it's something that I'm ever going to probably understand.
Yeah, a lot of people think it's we have this stigma in socialism, right, where people look at it is in because we're trying to equalize society in such a way. People think that there won't be innovation that results from that, because people think if you remove capitalism, that innovation will stifle in every single possible way. I.e., innovation of using iPhones and technology, like all that would not exist if capitalism didn't exist. I call that absolute bull. And the only reason for that is innovation will always exist. It doesn't matter which system you're under. This is how revolutions occur.
Like before I go, one of the best examples of it is you say to people, look, you can have more bank holidays, you can have that, you can get more pay, you deserve more time off work, and they'll argue with you as to why they don't deserve it. But it's not their fault. This is the system that has created this, that's what people think is their worth. And we have to basically dismantle our whole way of thinking. And it's no wonder that people feel like that, because it is pushed at them through the media, it's pushed at them in the newspaper, it's pushed at them through Parliament. The whole thing is set up to make people feel like that. So it doesn't surprise me, but it frustrates me, because I just kind of wish sometimes we could, and that's why all the stuff that we've spoken about, political education, being part of a collective, you can see what's happened. I'm a Unite National Political Officer. What's happened with regards to Barn Oldswick and the Rolls-Royce dispute. That is a whole community standing together, demanding more, demanding that this doesn't happen. And they won it. And they didn't just win it, they absolutely smashed it. And more communities could do that. But I am going to have to go. I'm going to leave you with the trolls. I bet they all leave now that I'm going.
No, but again, Laura hit the nail on the head there about the importance of political education and how this shows it. Because again, we have done in the Beehive already, we've done sessions on historical materialism, we've done sessions on ideology in the media and stuff like that. But we have to do this work with people. And again, it's not a case of the whole thing with ideas is that it's not just people, whether it's racism, whether it's sexism, whether it's the idea that capitalism is natural and you only get innovation under capitalism, these aren't things that spontaneously appear in people's minds. There are social relationships and histories that embed these ideas in people's minds, and we have to build movements that sort of counteract that. And Laura mentioned the point there about, people saying you can say to people you can have more bank holidays. Well, James Connolly, who we've mentioned a half dozen times, he used to sort of ridicule this, but in a powerful slogan. He said, we're being very modest. He said, we only want the earth. Right. And again, as a class, working class people produce everything of value in the world. Nothing moves. If we go on, which is why the start of the pandemic, when people stayed home from work, is why business and the right wing were so militant to try and get people back out to work, even though it wasn't wise from a public health perspective. Because when workers aren't working, the whole thing comes to a standstill. So without workers, it doesn't happen. And what socialism then is about democratically and fairly putting the control of production under democratic control. And to go back to James's point about innovation, look at the pandemic. We had a few years back about 400 different companies making fidget spinners. When a global pandemic hits this country and a health crisis hits this country, we can't get doctors and nurses the PPE they need. I mean, we've got 800 different sorts of TVs you can get. There's all sorts of different, designer clothes and everything else. This goes back, and we might get to this, not in the first 10-week course of the political education project, but at a later point. It goes back to a distinction between what's known as use value and exchange value. So you make things, and when you make something, it has a use value. So a hat is useful because it can keep your head warmer, it looks good. But under capitalism, things aren't produced for their usefulness. Under capitalism, things are produced for their exchange value. Things are produced so they can be sold for a profit by the person that owns the factory. And in terms of iPhones and so forth, again, you don't have that without workers. Elon Musk hasn't made that in his life. You know what I mean? He's inherited wealth from his family. He's used that then and all sorts of connections to exploit that going forward. But he's never invented anything, never produced anything of value. It's the workers who've done it. And socialism is about making sure that those who produce are the ones who benefit and the ones who make the democratic decisions about what society does. So again, you will get these trolls, but that's again part of the ideological apparatus that sustains capitalism, and the political education project is about challenging that. I don't know if we discussed this, Paul, in the interview, but there's a quotation that's wrongly attributed to Steinbeck, which is that the reason that there hasn't been a revolution in America is because there are no poor people, there are only temporarily embarrassed millionaires. And these sort of people who come on, who are probably earning about 20 grand a year and want to defend capitalism and the right of Elon Musk to make billions, are in that camp. They think that one day they'll be Elon Musk, but they won't be. And the grandkids won't be, and the great-great-grandkids won't be. If anything, with the trajectory capitalism's on, things will get worse for them.
Brilliant. Well, what we're going to do now is we will take a break. We will say goodbye to Laura because she has been absolutely fantastic. Toto has sent his love. Someone who we've had on Socialist Think Tank to do one of the 12 Days of Solidarity. Absolutely brilliant, solid socialist, really good guy. So he says, bye Laura, love you. So that's what a lovely way to say goodbye to you. What I'm going to do is for the three of us who are going to hang around for a few minutes, we've got billions of questions coming in, to be honest. What I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly set the scene. I'm going to give us a 5-minute break. You can go and get yourself a beer and go and get yourself, pop to the toilet or anything like that, which you may need to do. We're going to say bye to Laura and thank her so much. Because
my pleasure as always.
You,
I'm going to go and check now, see if I've said anything that means that I'm getting expelled.
Definitely. If they expel you for this, then you're in the wrong party. To be fair,
but you're in the right movement. You can go on your alt account and troll us now.
Okay, so I'll say bye, and we're going to put you on the hold screen for a couple of minutes, and then we'll see you in like 3 minutes.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Lovely to see you, Trump.
Good.
The story like the back of my hand, 'cause I've heard it all before. You always say that you're the one that's in demand, and I don't know the score. Times that you have tried to play the game, trying to have things your own way. It's led to nothing and things still remain the same. And I don't wanna play.
the red flag flying here.
I know the story like the back of my hand, 'cause I've heard it all before. You always say that you're the one that's in demand, and I don't know the score. And all the times that you have tried to play the game, trying to have things your own way, it's led to nothing and things still remain the same. And I don't wanna play.
Retrieve the red flag flying here.
Hi, I think that's us back. So let us know in the comments whether we're back or not, and you know, give us some questions. So yeah, back to where we were. Paul, you need to kind of move back slightly, just a little bit. But yeah, yep, that's awesome. That's absolutely brilliant. And why has this channel come here that late? Periscope gonna go off soon, as someone said. I think it's going to transition to Twitter, so I think you'll just manage to see that. Right, so didn't Democrats create the welfare state? What a good place to start. Did Democrats in the USA create the welfare state?
No. No. So the first, sorry, just to answer specifically, the first modern iteration of the welfare state was created by Bismarck in Prussia in the mid-19th century. And interestingly, Bismarck set it up to undermine socialists. So the socialists in Germany were gaining support and gaining power. So Bismarck introduced the first examples of what we'd call the welfare state, so sick pay and various other things, to try and take support away from the socialists. And then after World War II, or just before, in the interwar period, FDR in the US did his Four Freedoms speech, which is the basis in some respects for the limited welfare state they developed in the US. With post-World War II, right across Europe, you had much more advanced welfare states. In Scandinavia, based on the Meidner Plan and other things. In Britain, which developed the NHS, and elsewhere. But not, so no, the short answer is no.
At least it was qualified as well with a reason of, you know, did they invent it? What do you like? That it's kind of this is again emphasizing the need for political education, isn't it? Because if you don't have political education, then how can you know that? That is not a stupid question, is it?
No, it's a good question.
And I think that people who ask questions like that and so didn't, like, you know, the NHS, for example, there's a lot of confusion around that, and I think people were very taken in. Like, so certainly near me, people were saying who invented the NHS? Was it the Beveridge report? Now Beveridge was a liberal, wasn't he? Is that right? So he was a Liberal Party person, and people saying, "Oh, it had cross-party support, etc." You know, is that true?
But they didn't vote it down like about 40 times before it passed, though, did it?
The Conservatives
they
did,
never
and now
mentioned that part, though, did they?
But they claim it was this cross-party consensus that appeared after World War II, and I suppose to an extent There is some truth in that, I guess,
Yeah.
but not.
But it's like even the question with the Democrats. So there is some truth in it. It depends on who you read. So there's a guy called Kaz Sunstein who's a professor of law in Yale, I think now, or Harvard, and he's written a book about the origins of social rights, and he gives FDR a much more prominent place in that. And FDR, of course, was a sort of a U.S. president, that kind of, so you could interpret it that way, but historically that's not accurate. There's a guy called Ashborn Wall, who's a Norwegian trade unionist who's excellent. He's written a great book called The Rise and Fall of the Welfare State, and he gives a much richer historical account for anybody who's interested in it. In terms of the NHS, I mean, it's one of the things we'll try and do with the political education project, because before Corbyn came along, or maybe around the same time, Ken Loach did that film, The Spirit of 45, and trying to sort of do this sort of nostalgic. Well, look, we built the NHS, so we could do that again, and I think it's something that's important for people to understand, which is that there are historically specific circumstances that produce the NHS which don't exist today. So again, one of them was it was post World War II when Europe had been destroyed. And what we saw for 25 years after that was a very unique period of growth for capitalist economies because of rebuilding Europe, rebuilding Japan, because of the exporting power of the US, because there were still colonies that the Western states were taking resources and wealth from. And there was that very brief period where the capitalist class made concessions to a relatively strong working class. You had all these soldiers coming back from war who joined the unions, who made certain demands. And that was a very brief moment in the history of capitalism. It lasted about 25 years. And once the oil shock happened and the crisis of capitalism started in the late 60s, early 70s, then we saw the emergence of neoliberalism to tear all that up and restore the status quo. And that's where we are now. We're in a situation now where the limited gains that our class made after World War II have been torn to shreds. Trade union membership is half what it was here in the 70s. Trade union militancy has been in decline. Things like the political education project are stepping in as a sort of drop in the ocean for the traditional institutions of working class organisation and political education that we lost. But we're going to have to go forward rather than looking back to what was achieved with the NHS. Sorry.
Yeah, so I think they were trying to, especially in the Jeremy Corbyn movement, what they were really trying to do with that was trying to spot a connection between the austerity measures that were being put into place to the desperation and families that were feeling so torn up by exactly the deindustrialization of the areas, the Thatcher era, everything. Or there were a combination of things that happened before that, including the Labour Party under Tony Blair, and consecutive governments after that. They've destroyed the areas in such a way that they, in some respects, it has hit the consciousness of society in ways like the World War II. So I think that's what they were trying to emphasize on. And I think that wave is still occurring across Europe and not just the UK, where all of these austerity measures that have been put into place for all of Europe and beyond to combat the absolute bankruptcy of each nation to the capitalist system, then sorry.
I think you're spot on. Yeah.
Bit of a rant.
No, I think that's spot on. I think the one thing I'd say, just to sort of add to that as well, is that the thing about austerity is, because it's interesting in terms of the history, and again, it's one of the things that, as I said, hopefully with the political education project we'll do, but the first real instances of austerity happen in the global south and sort of places like Chile, after the overthrow of Pinochet, and they bring in this sort of shock doctrine of rolling back the state and privatizing everything. So that was, first of all, that was the West via the US and that exporting that initially, but then it comes full circle, and the sort of debt crisis that hits in 2008 means then pushing those policies in Western countries. Now, the big thing we have, and it's one of the problems as socialists and in trying to confront the rise of right-wing parties, is that there can be a nostalgia for what there was before, right? And so when we had relatively stable jobs here in Britain, relatively stable industries, whether that was in coal, whether it was in sort of textiles, whatever, that was a very specific historical moment. And there was lots of exclusion then. So women were treated very differently then. Non-white people were treated very differently then. Racism was a key part of what sustained that. And that's not a moral judgment on people. That's a descriptive reality of that. The danger, and you see it in the Labour Party with the sort of blue Labour tendencies, is it becomes this sort of reactionary nostalgia. And they go, well, things are bad now because all of a sudden people have pronouns and all of a sudden there are migrants and there's different religions and that we need to get back to when it was that and it was solid and it was white and it was British and it was working class and that was good. But it's impossible. Do you know what I mean? Like, first, they don't understand what that was. And secondly, they can't achieve the imaginary version they want. So again, as socialists, whether it's up in Durham or whether it's in Manchester, London, whatever it is, the vision we have to try and develop is the forward-looking one. So something that could have been done in Britain under a Corbyn government and that would have made a difference would have been serious investment in renewable energy, right? Because in terms of the global economy, that is something that's necessary. And it's something Britain could have taken a lead on. And they could have created thousands of apprenticeships and well-paid jobs that could last for the next 20, 30 years and then built off the back of that. One of the big problems, and we discussed it in the interview with Paul, is that was, again, very technocratic and very top-down. It didn't actually involve people. And because of that, that was part of the reason why it didn't capture the imagination. People didn't feel like it belonged to them.
Yeah, the whole overall strategy for that, for the next industrial revolution, the green industrial revolution, the whole strategy behind that, I think, was fundamentally correct. Like the practice is in place for the things that they need to create. Like they need to be mining more lithium. They need to be creating more batteries. They need to be setting up like more recycling centers. You know, like the whole process around that is not just that. You still have to open more mines. You want to be mining more ore. You know, like there's a lot of industry built around that. There was a whole tactic. It's just how they conveyed that, in my opinion, which was overall flaw. So it's trying to, they have a strategy, but it did come top down. No matter what, it did come top down. It didn't come from the local, each individual area. What did you want? What more do you want in your area? Like in mine, I can see from across the coast of Hartlepool, for example, all of the wind turbines, and we have them in inland, and we have a few solar farms, for example. What I would have loved is for that to be extended up the coastline, for example, just little things like that. And we already know there's a lot of geothermal energy still sucked underneath our feet due to the mines that have been left down there from the coal mining, the industrial revolution, the coal mining era. So what we can do is go down there and, you know, create some geothermal energy, and it's free heating for homes. Mm-hmm. Like we could be doing that type of stuff. The scientific research is all out there. It's just, it hasn't been actioned upon because it doesn't make money for people. It's just because that energy is free. They're like, how can we make some money off it before they even look at it? Yeah. And that's the problem. It's not coming from the people. It's coming from people from the top and outside interest.
Yeah.
I've got a few questions coming in from the chat. One is, can you recommend a book to read on the proper history of the Labour Party, please? I can't. I don't know one that's going to do it. It's kind of an amalgamation, and you learn more and more from different books, is my opinion, but I don't know if there's one definitive version that would really tell you a lot. And we've also got someone who's asking about the socialist movement in Bangladesh, Isa Kar, I think. I hope I'm getting the pronunciation right. Pronunciation is my big bugbear. I really worry about it. He says, I think, yeah, it's he. My opinion is my country's socialists have a big problem with their work ethic.
Okay, so I don't know, Jay, but on the books about Labour, there's a book by Tony Cliff and Donny Gluckstein called The Marxist History of the Labour Party, which is worth a look. Bearing in mind these guys were in the SWP and they come at it from a very particular perspective, but it is useful. I mentioned one earlier by Theodore Rothstein, which is From Chartism to Labourism, which is about the founding of the Labour Party in the early years. And there's some really good stuff. I can send links if you want. Paul and Socialist Think Tank can share them. There was really good debates in the 80s, 60s, 70s and 80s on the Labour Party and Labourism. And it's one of those things we did with the Beehive in Manchester, because a lot of people had just come out of the Corbyn thing, and I sort of suggested this article from 1964, and it could have been written the day after the general election 2019. It was all the same things, and this is one of the really important. As I said, I'm not in Labour. I don't think the prospects for developing socialist and working class politics within Labour is very positive, but I respect people that stay in there. I think the thing is to understand the history of it and understand the nature of the politics you're involved in. And there's the thing around Starmer and that, like Starmer shouldn't have come as a surprise to anyone, not just him as an individual, but the sort of politics he represented. Corbyn really was an aberration in the history of the Labour Party, a fluke, a historical one-off produced by Ed Miliband's sort of flippancy around changing the rules about who could vote in leadership elections, those £3 memberships or £5 memberships or whatever it was. And then Corbyn
just a quick one, was that arrogance around or was that something like Ed Miliband thought, yeah, this is a really good idea, and everyone around them went, yeah, that would be a really good idea, because they didn't think they thought everyone else thought like them as neoliberals?
So there's a guy called Peter Mayer who's written a really good book called Ruling the Void, and this shows how in Western democracies over the last 40 years there's been a dual movement of electorates withdrawn from electoral politics and electoral parties withdrawn from the electorate, right? So, and again, he maps the evidence right across Western Europe and America and so forth, and shows this has been this is why the Brexit vote was so important. It was the single biggest democratic vote in British history, and that's why it was significant. So I think with people like Ed Miliband, there was a lot of liberal scholarship around the need to encourage participation. And I think that this initiative to allow for those £3 memberships and so forth was just half thought through. I don't think they fully anticipated or understood the possibility of the crisis of capitalism producing an appetite for someone like Corbyn, and that fundamentally transforming what was going on in Labour for that period of time, because they just assumed that the Blairite revolution had been successful. Labour was on that trajectory because that's what every sister party of the Labour Party around Europe is on the same trajectory. They've all the historic social democratic parties, the SPD, the Socialists in France, they've all capitulated. They've all collapsed. Their vote is down to 20%, but they're locked into this model of professional careerist politicians managing the ship with no real ideas how to change that and around, because they're ultimately committed to the same politics as
my question is though, well, I'd say for me is is what other alternative is there? Because every other alternative I see at the moment is either a vanity project.
Yeah.
I don't mean to name them like you do. But a lot of them are. There's quite a few. There's not just one. There's a lot of vanity projects out there at the moment, which has taken away a lot of support from Labour since the collapse of Jeremy Corbyn in UK politics. But overall, what I'm trying to say is I don't see any other alternative other than Labour. So what other alternative do we have other than stay in Labour? And that's my argument of always why I've personally stayed in Labour. And I've always sat on the sidelines. I've looked at politics and then got really involved when Jeremy Corbyn came in. And then other than that, now it's the only reason I'm staying is I do see people who fight for it, who have been here for absolutely literally 40 plus years, and they have all the same fundamental foundations as I do, and all the same ideals. And they are the ones keeping me in, nothing else. It's just, I think this is Labour is the vehicle, the only alternative vehicle in the UK at the moment. Whether or not that changes, I don't see it happening within our. I would say within the next decade or two. I don't see it happening because nobody's produced themselves basically as a credible alternative.
I don't know. So do you want to say it on that, Paul, or?
No. I'm interested in what's coming in on the chat. So Isaac was saying. Back to Bangladesh a little bit.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Our socialist people start their work by attacking religious sentiment rather than teaching us justice. And I don't really know, and I don't expect any of us on this call to know enough about Bangladesh's particular circumstances to comment too much on that. But it's really interesting that we're talking about Bangladesh, and and there's been so much. Like British imperialism has affected Bangladesh so much, And we've also he mentions his country's kind of religious. And then Musa, friend of the show, is saying, "What are vanity projects?"
But then to go back to James's point then about what's the alternative to Labour, I suppose it may, and to use the metaphor of a vehicle, I suppose it depends on where you want to get to. Do you know what I mean? If you're talking about vehicles, so right, if the main focus is elections, and if the main focus is possibly forming a national government of some sort, irrespective of what the content of that government is, if the main focus is forming a government, then yeah, Labour is the only vehicle. But that's not how you advance socialism. That's not how you advance independent working class politics. Again, I mentioned it earlier, and again, I like you. I know lots of people who are staying in Labour who I respect. Laura is one of them, but there are many others who I sort of have a lot of respect for. But fundamentally, the stay and fight thing was just stay and capitulate. There was no fight. I know some people got readmitted yesterday or the day before, but they shouldn't have been suspended in the first place. And so if you fought to get overturned something that shouldn't have happened, and now you think it's a victory that you're back to where you were before you started, but yet the former leader of the party, who galvanized the whole movement around the idea of a modest form of social democratic transformation, has had the whip withdrawn and won't get it back. And nobody within the party has done anything about it, aside from the classic petitions. And if
And
petitions
also they were reprimanded as well. Those people,
yeah,
they did, they didn't get back in with no
no, no,
case to
no,
answer or anything.
no,
It's
slap on
this
the wrist
like
on a
kind of
morning.
awful thing,
Yeah, yeah.
and this was one of the things that shocked me about the Labour Party movement, being a trade unionist. There was no natural justice whatsoever. It's like, we will decree whether you're a member or not, or not,
Yeah.
and if you haven't broken the rules, we won't say that you haven't broken the rules, you're fine, you haven't done anything wrong. We'll
Yeah.
say, you know, you shouldn't have been investigated in the first place. It's like
Yeah.
the idea of you being investigated for something, doing something wrong,
That attitude
is a
comes
slur
from
on
the
your
executive
character.
leadership.
You know.
Like the same thing currently is happening at the moment with the community organisers. They really don't care. That was setting in Jeremy Corbyn era, who had the community organisers set in place, and they're all just firing them
Yeah.
in the middle of the pandemic. And the only thing about that I've noticed with the Labour Party is they're the only ones who are doing that. The trade unions aren't doing it. The trade unions are opening doors. They're opening more positions. They're inviting people in, more support, that type of thing, because they know people are suffering. They know people need the help, and now is the best time to open doors if has ever been any.
No, and the thing about the community organising unit is that that's partly a factional thing. So again, as you said, it was brought in under Corbyn, but it's also because the actually existing Labour Party over the course of its history, this community organising unit is anathema to it. That sort of politics isn't what the Labour Party is about. It's not what it's ever been about, except for that brief moment when Corbyn was in there. But to go back to that point about alternatives and vehicles, again, it depends on what you want to achieve. So again, Labour is the only electoral vehicle if you want to get into government, right? But what would a Labour Party in government look like in 10 years' time? 10 years' time after the sort of consolidation of what Starmer has done, there's no pushback from the left within the party in any meaningful sense. You know what I mean? There's lots of people leaving, as you said, joining these vanity projects like the Workers' Party, GB, and other initiatives, which again, unfortunately, will take up a lot of time and energy for people.
So quickly, what is a vanity project?
By vanity project, to answer the question, it means it's something. I think, James used it, but I'd use the same expression. It's something that's driven by a particular individual's strong personality, but has no real social basis and no real political project. And in the cases of the Workers' Party, it's George Galloway, who is one of the best public speakers in British political life, is a great orator, but there's no substance to the Workers' Party GB. It's just a vanity project built around his personality. And on Bangladesh, I'm afraid I don't know enough about, aside from knowing a little bit about some of the really good militancy and organisation in the textile industry by the workers there, and some of the horrendous sort of tragedies that have happened there in the last few years. I don't know enough about the politics of Bangladesh to be able to comment on it.
So the comments back on that are a good thank you for what a vanity project. Can Paul continue on alternatives to electoralism? And from Isa, I hope that's the correct pronunciation. I see Western socialism movement is a pack of intelligent intellectual, and my country is one full of. Doesn't finish that sentence, but it sounds like he's saying that it's a bluff, like the socialists in Bangladesh are a bluff. Maybe I'm guessing.
I don't know.
You know,
Again, I don't
I'm
know
really
enough.
interested in this. I might investigate this after, and please do
I
get
don't
in
know
contact afterwards.
the politics of other countries in that respect, especially like Bangladesh and stuff. I am nowhere involved or understanding in like trade unions, for example, in those areas. I know like trade unions can be abused in other countries depending on where they are at. They can be abused even in Western countries as well, just as much. It's just all about checks and balances. Checks and balances.
I think I need to think about the health and well-being of the people on this call. So I'm going to call a close at maybe 11:15. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Sounds good. And so we've got a couple in since I've said that. So as I said, can Paul continue on alternatives to electoralism? And we've had a cracker in as well from Mark Rattigan, who's a student I used to teach. He's not a student anymore. He works in a school himself. Really, really good, solid lad. How do you advance a socialist society without your hands on the UK Treasury?
Mm-hmm.
Without political power, I don't see how we bring about the real positive change for working people. Surely any Labour government is better than a Tory one.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the vehicle part, I think, came into play. Is where I was on about it's the only vehicle. Well, you've got to be there to be able to change the apparatus. You've got to be in the power to be able to change it. But it's not all about the power changes in the apparatus anyway, because there's a ladder climb to get before you get there, and there's compromises you've got to make before you get there. The majority of the time, especially in Western politics, and then kind of lost me train of thought a little, but I think there's a lot of compromises. You do need to get into that position of power, but there's a fundamental change in society's consciousness that needs to occur before we can fundamentally change the apparatus that we're actually up against, i.e. the turning cycles of elections and the focus on all of that.
I'll just do a really quick one on this one, a really quick one.
Yeah.
I don't think the UK system is set up to be changed.
Yeah.
They didn't set up the system of Westminster, that massive authority power, that big building, that thing that makes working class people feel uncomfortable. I don't think it is set up to be changed. Mm-hmm. It's set up to resist change.
Yeah.
So electoralism is not necessarily the best way to go about things. You can't just elect MPs. Even the Labour Party are trying to resist working class MPs from ever getting a chance to get into that thing. There's a filtration, there's a filter before you get there, I would say.
Yeah.
But so, Paul, you were asked a question specifically, so
no. So it's a good question, right? And I think again, this is where the political education side of it comes in, not just political education, but more broadly, a sort of socialist perspective and a Marxist understanding of the nature of power and the nature of the state. It's about how you understand power, right? So there's a guy called István Mészáros who was a really good writer. A really intelligent guy, but a bit of a turgid writer sometimes. And he had this expression. He says, "Capitalism is the extra parliamentary force par excellence, and socialism has to be equal to that." Right. So what he means by that is that power within capitalist societies isn't in parliament and it's not in ministers. That just looks like it. That's just so that's Mészáros, who can be a bit heavy-handed. Hilary Mantel, Bring Up the Bodies. You probably read this book. There was a TV series around it and so forth. And a line in that was, you think that power is in castles and ramparts and things. It's not. It's in the counting houses of Venice, right? And the point there again is that it's how we understand power, right? So here's a concrete recent example. this government has absolutely fucked the handling of COVID at every level, right? It's sort of it spent billions on projects that go nowhere. It's cancelled and rushed the end of the lockdown too soon. It's fucked up the PPE. It's messed up the, excuse my French, it's messed up the rollout of a whole variety of different responses, right? Now, the Labour Party has been toothless in the face of it. You've got a number of Labour MPs in there, they've done nothing except cheerlead the government's response and sort of shadow it and back it and, do absolutely nothing. What's the one thing that has happened in the last year that has quite likely saved lives? It was the NEU refusing to send its members back to work when the government wanted to do it. That's power. That's the power of an organised working class taking a stand on an issue and forced the government to change its policy, which might have cost lives. So the thing is,
before that, leading up to that with the trade unions, there was a lot of that with the teacher trade unions.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think
there was a lot big campaign to discredit them as well.
Massively, exactly.
Media,
they understood that.
Sponsored advertisings and everything.
The government doesn't bother discrediting the Labour Party because they're not scared of them. But an organised trade union in the form of the NEU, who were ready to oppose what they were doing, the government and the media has tried to discredit them. So I think we have to have a conversation about power. And the question was, how do you advance socialism without having your hands on the exchequer? Well, again, it's about how you understand socialism. So if you thought it was just legislating and sort of redistributing the existing pie, then yeah, absolutely. And again, sorry, I should just say, I'm not saying electoralism isn't part of it. I'm saying that electoralism is the lesser part of it than people currently think it is. And that what we should be doing is building up trade unions, community organizations, independent sorts of working class organization, where people start doing things like, for example, in Brazil, before Bolsonaro came into power, you had participatory budgeting. So people around Durham, for example, rather than the council saying, here's the budget for the year, people in the area would form committees in the local area, would say, what do we think is important, right? Now, through that, you empower people. And we're talking about power here. And what is power? Unionizing people, getting more people into unions, but also changing the unions. Our unions have become decrepit over the last 40 years because of the defeats we've suffered as a class. So we need to change our unions. The unions have to become democratized, have to become more militant. So if you ask me, what am I doing with my time and energy as somebody committed to a socialist society, I'm putting my time and energy into union work, into political education, into community organizing, because that's what I see as crucial rather than the electoralism. And the point is, and again, every socialist and every Marxist in the early 19th and the 20th century understood this. The point is that the election side of it is the echo of the battle. Once you've built your numbers, once you've marshaled your forces, then when you contest the election and win the election, you're in the capacity to back up what you said you'd do. You got the capacity and the power to back up what you said you'd do. Whereas we said, if Corbyn had been elected, if he'd managed to get in 2017 by pure fluke, the attacks that he would have been subjected to and the movement would have been subjected to. And because we didn't have a movement outside of Parliament ready to support that, we wouldn't have been able to back him up as a class. He would have been absolutely torn asunder. So you build that base. I think we discussed this in the interview, Paul. I give the example of Bolivia, which is a very good recent example. In Bolivia, the European Union, who all the EU flag shaggers love but know nothing about, the European Union and the US backed a coup against a democratically elected government in Bolivia. Anybody who knows anything about the history of Latin America knows how that script works. There's a US-backed coup, there's a right-wing assault on trade unions and working class communities, and there's a dictatorship for 10, 15, 20 years. It didn't happen this time. Within a year, the movement, the MAS, pushed back, won all the elections, expelled the coup leaders, brought Morales back. And the reason they did that is because before they were a party that contested elections, they had built a social base of indigenous communities, workers, trade unionists, and they'd done political education for years. So they were solid. They didn't break when the assault happened. They took the blows, they regathered, and they came back again. So I just think it's about different understands of power and different understands about what we're trying to achieve.
See, we've got like within the trade union movement, we've got people who don't understand anything. Like I've been to so many trade union events, and we did speak about this outside of the interview about how when I turned up at a little bit about my history. I won a trade union award when I was younger, and someone fought for that. Like there was a Sue Foreman who is a really really good solid trade unionist, fought for me to be able to win this award for the trade union, because the trade union had set up an award for young members to be able to have a voice. But what they wanted was someone who's just like fitting in with the system, and I'd organised a strike within my workplace. And I'm like, bloody hell, don't have a strike. Don't have a strike. That is not what we want to promote. Which, locally my union is extremely good at organising that. But, it's that kind of, how do we deal with people who really don't want to rock the boat within trade unionism, would be my point there.
You empower people who will. I mean, that's part of it. You know what I mean? So again, like within trade union bureaucracies, within the main trade unions in Britain, there are some excellent people who are in there because of political commitment and so forth. And then there are other people who've just gone through the motions and are sort of career orientated and who have no interest in rocking the boat in any way, shape, or form, and will do the sort of bread and butter stuff that trade union sort of bureaucrats do. But so at the end of the late 70s, I can't remember the woman's name who wrote this book. There's a book called Ramparts of Resistance about trade unions in Britain and the US and that. But in the late 60s, early 70s, there was an awful lot of strike action in Britain. Most of it was illegal. Most of it was grassroots trade unionists in the workplace going, we're not having this or we're not having that, and coming out on strike. And that was because there was a close relationship between union officials and the membership, and there was that sort of organic link. This is why the fight against the miners was so important. And in a place like Durham, you obviously know this history better than I do. This is why Thatcher mobilised MI5, the media, the entire British state to break the miners, because it wasn't just about beating the miners, it was about breaking the British working class as an organised force. That's why it was so important. That's why they still vilify Arthur Scargill today. That's why they still attack him and they still sort of caricature him and lampoon him, because you had to break that. You had to break that idea that the working class could say, we're not having this, we're going to do things differently. And most of the miners understood that, and Scargill understood that at the time. And so where we are now, we're 40 years after that. We're 40 years the trade unions being co-opted, being brought into all sorts of forms of social partnership. The EU played a big role in this, being flown out, trade union officials, to Brussels and to Luxembourg and having meals and staying in 5-star hotels and thinking that it's all about being friends with the bosses and cutting deals and sorting it out. And then you have workers who've seen fall in real wages for the last 30 years, who've seen insecurity in employment, who've seen the pressure they're under. I mean, who works a 40-hour week anymore? Even if you're not in the job, you're on the job. It's in your head. You never switch off. You know, people are working 60, 70-hour weeks. Trade union membership is half. Trade union militancy has declined. So the only way to rebuild that is by going to those people who will do it. And again, these will be people, and this is part of the politics we have to get into again. These will be people you won't agree with on everything. You know what I mean? Some of them might have arsehole, backwards racist views. Some of them might have different views, like sexist views and stuff like that. And you can't get in there and sort of moralize them and call them fascists and tell them to run away. You have to build that power and then break that stuff down by confronting them. You have to then have those arguments and have those. It's the only way to do it, you know. And it's a slow process and it's a frustrating process. But the only way the unions will fight for us is when the members are leading the unions. And that in part is what happened with the NEU with this initiative. Because again, you're a teacher, Paul, so you know the NEU hasn't covered itself in glory in the last 25, 30 years. But in the last year and a half, it's been fantastic. And that's been in part because of grassroots members pushing the union and sort of making demands around safety of staff or safety of students and so forth, and pushing them and forcing the union to take that initiative that the NEU of its own volition might not have done previously. So that's the only way. It's the only way you change it. And again, the serious problem we have now, and I think we said this maybe in one of the outtakes of the interview or something like that, I'd love us to have a sort of national strike tomorrow. You know what I mean? I'd love us to have a general strike, but it's not going to happen. We're at a stage now of having to do the slow, laborious work of rebuilding people's confidence, of going back to some of the stuff James said earlier about the things that people take for granted and so forth. We're going to have to get the people to the stage now of going, you know, you deserve better than this. You're entitled to better than this, not as a sort of consumer, but you're entitled to better than this as somebody who's part of a class and part of a history, part of a movement. We all deserve better than this. Your kids deserve better than this. And if we don't do anything about it now, it's just going to get worse. I think we might have mentioned in the interview, but we definitely did it in the political education project. Rosa Luxemburg, who was a Polish communist and Marxist, just before the outbreak of World War One, said the choice for us all was socialism or barbarism, and the choice then that was made was barbarism. And we saw it, what World War One was, what the Depression was, what World War Two was. But now look at the world we live in. Look at Britain. 14 million people in poverty. 4 million kids not being fed properly in the fifth wealthiest country in the world. You look at this pandemic now and how it's playing out in terms of geopolitics. The West has more vaccines than it can use and administer, but they're slow in getting them out to other parts of the world. This is barbarism. Barbarism isn't someone doing something specifically horrible. It's a system that lets kids die, that lets people go hungry, that lets suicide rates go through the roof and says that's just life. That's the barbarism. We can do better than that. Sorry. Stop talking.
No need to apologise.
Well, you need to apologise. I was just going to say that Paul never needs to apologise.
That's why I said there's no need to apologise.
Right, okay. So
I haven't drank in about a year, and I've had 3 beers now, so I know I'm talking more than I should be. So.
To be honest, I hope this Zoom lasts forever, but we're gonna finish the official part of it in 5 minutes' time. We're getting loads of comments in, loads of positive things. I think it's absolutely brilliant to see people from around the world getting involved with this. Flag Shaggers got a particular laugh, which is a good thing. I don't think we should be afraid of speaking in our own dialect, our own language, the way people of the working class speak. Posh people are allowed to say their ridiculous things that dither and delay and that kind of thing, and that means nothing to anyone else. So why shouldn't we be able to call someone something? I find that particularly annoying when people denigrate that kind of language. We should be able to do that. So I'm going to ask us to kind of sum up our feelings about what are we going to do? What is the important thing to do? Obviously, it's education around how do we continue to do this? How do we continue to build? I'll also say from a perspective of Socialist Think Tank, please do like, share, and subscribe to everything we do. Get this out there. If you like this, then please share it, because that is the kind of grassroots movement that we need to support. We are not doing this for any other reason than to spread the word of socialism, the same as the political education project. So please do that. But James, I'll bring you in, and then I'll bring Paul in to close, who's been the star of the show tonight, and everyone loves him. So... not that everyone doesn't love you as well, James. But
oh no, it's fine. It's to be honest, he has been the star of the show, and he's entranced me in our conversations tonight. What I would like to say is, make sure you share, subscribe. This is what we're all about. I would like to thank Paul O'Connell for everything he does in the political education project. I would like to thank Laura for coming on tonight. Also, I know she had to leave, but this is just the after show, right? So, I think tonight's been very educational for me, and insightful, and I hope others found the same thing. The only other thing is, I would like to give shout outs to everybody who's been commenting. The questions have been great. I'd just like to touch on one on YouTube, where Paul Smith said Thatcher hated the working class, but the terrible irony is that the working class actually voted for her. Kind of agree. That is the terrible irony of that situation. But then, like I said, history, there's a lot of lessons to learn, and education is a fundamental part of that. I do think we need to take advantage of technology a hell of a lot more than what we have done in the past, as a movement, and use all forms of new media, and or extend arms out to as many pots as possible where audiences are, to try and get them involved and to learn about politics, not just as within your communities, but also online. I think that's very important nowadays, especially with everything that's going on in COVID. That's me.
you
Yeah,
go.
I agree
Paul?
completely with James. Thanks for having me on. And just to say, and again, so as a general rule, I'm not a favor of sort of podcasts and stuff as such, but I think that what the Socialist think is doing is phenomenally important, and also the people involved with it are just sort of excellent, genuine working class socialists. So do get on board, subscribe, and the fact that they've stepped up of their own volition and sort of recorded the audio recordings to make the political education project more accessible. That's a big lot of work, and again, it's something we might have thought of in 2 months' time. But at the end, this is the value of this project, that it's working class people from around Britain and Ireland coming together and going, you know what? And it goes back to something Laura said earlier, and also the Frarian stuff I mentioned. Like, part of the premise of what we do is that working class people have the answers to what's going on in their lives. They don't have the confidence necessarily to be able to articulate that, but there's a whole set of systemic forces that make it that way. Do you know what I mean? Like, I come from a family where every male in my family, except for me, so father, two brothers, cousins, uncles, has been to prison, except me. Do you know what I mean? And I was the fourth male in the family to finish secondary school. And again, that's not just me as an individual. That's structural. That's how this system works. It beats us down as a class. It sort of this de-skills us and sort of rips us of the idea that we have a say in how things should be, and we have a way of understanding things. Going back to what you said, Paul, about the vernacular, it makes us think that our accents don't fit and what we have to say doesn't work. You know what I mean? And so part of what we're trying to do with the political education project is turning all of that on its head. You know what I mean? And going back to people and saying, this. And again, I understand some of the jargon is specific. Hal Draper came out of a sort of Trotskyist movement in the mid 20th century. It has a particular language. Conley, it has a particular language. We can throw all that away so long as we catch the ideas and take what's useful from them and apply them to where we are today and use our own language and make it work for us in our own way. And I think that what we're going to try and do on PEP is play a part in that. I think what Socialist Think Tank is doing plays a part in that. I think there are other groups. There's the Ella Baker School, there's the Marx Memorial Library, there are the trade unions, the Bakers Union is fantastic, CWU, Unite, there are unions out there doing really good work, and then local communities and tenants associations in Manchester, I'm sure up in the northeast as well, Acorn and people like this. There's all sorts of stuff happening. We just have to be alive to that. And again, this is the one thing I'd say. I don't knock anyone for staying in the Labour Party. It's not for me for a whole set of reasons. I'm not in there. I won't put time and energy into that. I know people will do it, but I'd say do it with eyes open and ask yourself what's important to you. So we're talking about vehicles, right? Grand, a car might make sense, but if you want to get somewhere else, you're going to need a boat or an airplane or something else. You know what I mean? So think about the vehicle, think about where you want to get to, and then decide where you want to put your time and energy. If you want to come and do stuff for us in the political education project, please do get in touch. Socialist Think Tank, again, get involved with them and what they're doing. Or your local tenants union, whatever it is. There's other ways of advancing it. The key thing is that, and I think I said this in the interview, that we're facing a very serious crisis and nobody's coming to save us. Not Jeremy Corbyn, not AOC, not the British AOC in 5 years. Nobody's coming to save us except us. And that's the entire working class and all its diversity pulling together and turning things upside down so that we improve our situation. Sorry, leave that.
Never apologize. So you don't have anything to apologize for. Thank you so much for everyone who's watched this, who's listened. We really appreciate it because that's the important thing. It's not about us, it's about you. And I hope this means that in the future you will think, actually, my opinion's important. My opinion matters. My opinion will shape the future. That is the important thing. So I think that's what we'll leave it on. Thank you so much for all your comments from around the world. It's been really, really appreciated and kind of humbling as well when people get involved and speak about what their own experiences are. And we'll hope to see you next time, and don't forget to like and share and subscribe to everything, because there is a paid algorithm going on in this, and you can sort of defeat it if you do this for us. If you can do one thing, share this video, like it. That does help a lot. So please do that too. Please do that. We're not going to do the whole Owen Jones donate thing, that, like, you know, before they get into every single thing, like, please give us money, we're not going to do that, we are some, like, volunteers from the northeast of England, but that's not what we're about. You can't. No. There is a mechanism to do that, but that's not what we're about.
Send all your cryptocurrency. Send all your cryptocurrency to Socialist think tank.
Right. Brilliant. Thank you so much, and thank you, Paul, and we'll definitely pester you again to come on.
Anytime. Islam.
Bye.
We keep the red flag flying.